This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 79. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 79 of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. And in this episode, I am going to be unpacking the topic of how to get into the world of building automation systems. Recently I've had several conversations with different folks, all having different backgrounds, asking me how could they get into the world of building automation systems. So in this episode, we're going to look at the three backgrounds that tend to enter into the world of building automation systems. We're going to look at the four paths that you can take to enter into building automation systems. We're going to look at the three core skills you need to have. We're going to look at some of the reasons why folks at least say that they don't change into building automation systems. We'll talk about whether those are true or not. We'll look at how do you make the change into building automation systems without a pay cut, where the future of BAS is going, and the three areas you should focus on for a future-proofed building automation systems career. I know that's a ton of stuff, but this is an episode I've been meaning to have for quite some time now, because this is one of the most common questions I seem to be getting from all sorts of folks. So let's just dive in. So what I tend to see is that there are really three legs of the stool, essentially, that make up what a good building automation system person is. And those three legs are IT knowledge, HVAC, and electrical knowledge. Not necessarily in that order, but I think that's kind of where the industry is moving to in that order. It's kind of interesting because it always used to be HVAC, electrical, with a little bit of IT, if not no IT. But now IT has just kind of rapidly increased in its importance in the building automation space. So when I say IT, HVAC, and electrical knowledge, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is not that you need to be a master mechanic. You've been working on HVAC for 40 years, or, an expert electrician, or a Google level programmer in IT. That's not at all what I mean. But where I'm coming from with this is that in order to enter the world of BAS, you kind of have to have a combination of the three, depending on the company you're interviewing with. So I've met IT folks who are interested in building automation systems, but they tell me they can't go into the world of BAS because they don't have HVAC knowledge or they don't have electrical knowledge. And we'll talk through how to deal with that a little later in the episode. But likewise, I've heard of HVAC folks who are like, hey, I'm just not a computer person, so I can't work in BAS. Or electrical folks who, I'm just not into that HVAC stuff. So I want to explain what I mean by this. While you have to have those three skills to have a really kind of lengthy career in building automation systems, if you want to have a profitable, which I think every one of you should want to make as much money as you possibly can, because that's just my philosophy. You really should want to be able to do what you're passionate about, but you should want to get paid for what you're passionate about, because otherwise then you can't fulfill other aspects of your life. But this is not a episode on my own personal views of money and finances and all sorts of stuff there, so I'm just not going to belabor that point at all. But the point here is that in order to be more than just an installer, then you need to have more than just base level skills. And this will make more sense as we start to dive through what may be a multi-part series. At least right now I'm thinking it's going to be 2 parts, but it may end up being more than that. So you see, when I entered the world of building automation systems, I entered out of the Navy, and a lot of folks know my story, so I'll keep it kind of short. But I entered out of the Navy. I was a missile tech. I worked on missile systems. I knew a little bit about hydraulics, a little bit about electromechanical systems, circuits, that kind of stuff. knew how to read a lot of diagrams. Entered into building automation systems because it was kind of one of the only careers I could get getting out. And the thing is that I went straight into installation, then went and did service, then operations, and all that fun stuff. But what I did not experience, which is interesting, is I meet a lot of folks and they're like, well, I would go in BAS, but I can only make 30 grand. Or I would go in BAS, but I would just have to take a massive pay cut and things like that. And I didn't experience that. Now, granted, it may have been because of my military background, who knows, but I didn't run into that. So let's talk about really the 4 paths that you can take to get into the building automation world. Because I think when you see these paths, you'll start to see how you can really deal with some of these common objections. And we'll deal with the objections a little later in the episode of, oh, I don't want to be an installer just pulling wire, or oh, I don't want to just have to take this huge pay cut, or da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The list goes on and on and on. All right, so the 4 paths that I see, that I've seen from experience hiring and managing a $60 million business of building automation techs and programmers and designers and project managers, and just having had a long career in building automation system. Here's the 4 real entry paths I've seen. I've seen straight applications where folks just go and they find a building automation role and they apply for it, and the need is so great that they get hired regardless of their skill set. You know, that's actually what happened to me. And I like to think I turned into a pretty good building automation systems professional. Heck, I wrote the book on building automation systems, so I like to think I know a thing or two. And that path can work for a lot of people. But that path, depending where you live, can be very difficult. Some areas, it's a very easy path because they'll hire anyone with a heartbeat. Other areas, they're just not hiring, they don't have a lot of business, and that's a harder path. The next path is called the installer to technician path. And what do I mean by this? Well, this is more geared towards the electrical folks, the folks with the electrical background. And what you do here is you go and you look at, you know, I'm doing wiring, I'm doing all these things. Well, maybe I can find a company that has an electrical department and a BAS department, and I'll go work for that electrical department and gradually move on to those building automation system roles and responsibilities just through osmosis. I'll gradually take on more of those roles. And you'll notice that trend as we move through the other 2 paths, the HVAC to technician or the IT person to programmer / designer. And basically it's the same thing. You take your existing strengths that you have, you find an organization that has both of those, and then essentially you act as a hybrid role until you move into that pure technician role. And what I want to be clear on here is when I say technician, what I do not mean is a guy who's pulling wires, installing thermostats, and mounting VAV controllers on boxes. I mean, to me, that's glorified install. And I'm sorry if I insult some of you who are doing that role right now. That is not at all my intention. We all have to start somewhere, but that's installation. That's not a technician from my perspective. A technician is much more than that. A technician is doing programming. They're doing downloading. They're doing graphics. They're doing setups of the communication trunks. They're doing certain designs and as-builds. That's a true technician role, in my opinion. And then you have the IT to programmer designer role, which is kind of where you come in. Maybe you've got system administration. What? System administration. I don't even know what word I just said. You have a system administration role, or maybe you have a networking role, or maybe you have a coding role. And here's where you come in and you start to do some programming and designing. And this is becoming actually interesting because in the past, you really couldn't do this. If you were an IT guy and you didn't really have HVAC knowledge, you kind of just got laughed at and left to the wayside. But now with the advent of IP-based controls, cloud-based building automation systems, cloud-hosted building automation systems, virtual servers, all those things, Some building automation contractors are looking for folks with these IT backgrounds because they simply can't take advantage of all these advanced capabilities because their average technicians don't have the IT skills that are necessary to work with these next generation building automation systems. So let's talk about skills for a second. I mentioned some core skills earlier in the start of this episode. I talked about HVAC, I talked about IT, and I talked about electrical knowledge. What did I mean when I said those things? Well, what I want to clarify is when it comes to HVAC, a building automation person needs to understand how things operate. They need to understand the theory behind HVAC. I myself have never installed a fan. I myself have never went and brazed some pipe to connect a cooling coil. I myself have never went and done a quote-unquote mechanical startup on a rooftop unit. However, I would argue that I have just as much HVAC knowledge as pretty much 95% of the folks out there. Because I've experienced the designs, I've worked on so many projects and programmed so many systems that I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And I've seen all the disadvantages and advantages of using certain sequences. And so when I say that you need HVAC knowledge, I don't expect you necessarily to have been a mechanic. It's not a negative if you've been a mechanic by any way, shape, or form. But there's often this perception that if I don't have my HVAC license, if I haven't done HVAC install, I don't deserve to be in building automation systems, where I would say that can't be further from the truth. Some of the best hires I've ever had in building automation systems did not have an HVAC background. And actually, some of the worst hires I had an amazing HVAC background. It was less about their background and it was more about their ability to adapt to new technology, to learn new technology, and to think flexibly. I think that's how you say that word. Think with flexibility. There you go. I'm not going to edit this episode. I just don't have time, so you'll have to deal with my misspeaks. But that's the thing. HVAC, you just need to understand the fundamentals. The same with IT. You don't need to be an IT expert. It's interesting. So I'm in my third session right now of my IT for Building Automation Systems Professionals course, which that's my flagship course that I teach IT to building automation professionals, because there's no other course out there on the market that does this and does it online, self-paced, permanent lifetime access. So what I do is I've been doing these Tuesday night coaching calls with my students, and the questions I get, they're very, very good questions, but they are mainly questions focused on the design, not on the execution. Which, when you think about it, that makes sense, because once again, going back to that HVAC, it's about understanding the concepts, being able to communicate. Because quite often as a building automation professional, you are communicating to the mechanics what needs to be done. You are working with the electricians on what needs to be done. Well, the exact same with IT. You are talking with the IT professionals about what needs to be done. And then moving on to electrical knowledge, this is more fundamentals, understanding relay logic, understanding transformers, understanding volt amps, and understanding, as you introduce loads to a transformer, what does it do to the voltage? It causes it to drop because you're drawing more amps, you're adding resistance as you're going and drawing power, etc., etc. Just these basic electrical concepts, right, that you would pick up in almost any entry-level electrical and relay fundamentals course. And so as you see, in order to have a foundation to be a good building automation professional, you don't need to have necessarily these years and years of background in one of those trades, although it helps to get your foot in the door. So that's kind of my coaching to a lot of these hiring managers who are so stringent, and they're like, I can't find good building automation techs. when you look at their hiring requirements, it's like must have 10 years mechanical experience. And it's like, really? So you're going to eliminate electricians, you're going to eliminate IT professionals just because they don't have that HVAC experience? I would argue that if they can learn electrical fundamentals, if they can learn IT fundamentals, they can pick up HVAC fundamentals. None of this stuff is rocket science. It's all just how you think and how much you adapt to the learning process. And if folks can't adapt to the learning process, they're not going to succeed in building automation in the first place. So those are the core skills. Now let's unpack this topic that is just so prevalent. So I went on to the HVAC school Facebook group, and I like them. They're probably one of the only other real building automation HVAC podcasts out there. And so Brian Orr, he runs the HVAC school podcast, which if you're trying to learn about HVAC, it's a good podcast to listen to. And the thing is that I went on there just out of pure curiosity, because my mission is to help 20,000 people enter the building automation space by 2025. So I went there out of pure curiosity and I asked, why haven't you gone into building automation? Or are you interested in going into building automation? And I got a ton of replies, really good conversations I had there that I really enjoyed. And a lot of the guys there were, they're saying, hey, I'd really enjoy building automation, but I don't want to just be pulling wire all the time. Or I'd have to take a huge pay cut. Or I don't have the IT skills. Or, I'm not a computer person. I want to be out there working with my hands. And so it's just like you have these misconceptions of mechanics, or you have these misconceptions of electricians. Well, there's misconceptions of BAS as well. BAS is such a broad field. I like to say it's one of the fields that you could do literally anything you wanted to if you got into this. I mean, there's sales, engineering, there's energy efficiency, programming, analytics, cloud. I mean, I should spend a whole episode just going through all the different potential career paths you could have in the space of building automation systems. To me personally, it's one of the most exciting fields to be in, and that's why I have this podcast. That's why I run my blog. That's why I wrote my book. That's why I do my training programs, because I'm fascinated with this field. And so many of these comments, and I'm trying to think, how do I say this respectfully? So many of these comments, in my experience, are based on one or 2 points of reference. And what do I mean by that? Well, someone decides they want to be in building automation. And they're an HVAC mechanic, they're in the union, they've been doing it for a couple years, they're making $20, $30 an hour. And they go to 2 building automation companies and they're like, hey, I want to do building automation. And the companies are like, yeah, well, we can start you off at an installer $16 an hour, $20 an hour. They're like, man, that's a huge pay cut. I don't want to do that. Well, a couple things happened right there, right? First off, a lot of us in the building automation field, let's just be honest, we're not trained to negotiate a career. We're not trained. It's not our natural talents to go there and really sell ourselves. We work with our hands. We go and we build things. We go and we solve problems. But we don't sit there and polish up and sell ourselves all the time. That's just not what we do. And, even for some of the sales folks who are listening, a lot of the most successful sales folks I've seen come with a technical background. I'm not saying all of them, but a good portion of them, they have a technical background or they have a business background. It's one of the two. It's interesting because the engineering-ish folks I see, they tend to struggle because they can't decide which one to go with. But back to the point at hand. The point here is that we as a, what's the word I'm looking for? Not as a whole, but we as like a group on average, we tend to not sell ourselves very well. So we don't go there and we're like, yeah, well, I've worked on all these projects that involve building automation systems. I understand this stuff. I've got electrical background. I'm not just a wire puller. I'm not just a thermostat installer. I can do so much more. And also, what we don't look for is bridge opportunities. Maybe we look for an organization that has an HVAC service team that also does controls, and we do a natural migration from that HVAC to controls over time. So those are kind of the things that we don't look at and we miss, and they give us these misperceptions of, oh, I'd have to start off at the lowest point, I'd have to take a pay cut, or there's no jobs, because we're not looking in the right spots. So then the natural question becomes, how can we look in the right spots? How can we change without a pay cut? How can we change without having to do some boring installation labor that just really doesn't excite us? And we're like, man, that's just kind of not my thing. Well, if you're HVAC, then what I would do, if that's your background, like I said, and I'm kind of recapping here, but I really just want to make sure I drive these points home. I really would look at your current HVAC company. Maybe they want to pick up a building automation product and rep it and do that on a small scale. Maybe you find an HVAC company that does building automation and you kind of gradually go doing your HVAC work and then you gradually transition into building automation systems. It's a lot easier for someone to value a known commodity. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean a known commodity? Well, think about it this way, right? I could come up to you and offer you some no-name product, and it could be the best freaking product in the world, but you'd be like, yeah, I've never heard of that. I'm not going to use that. Well, it's the same thing. When you come up there, you may be the best person in the world. You may be really, really good at what you do, but they don't know who you are, and so it's like, how am I going to go and trust that this person can deliver when I can hire someone who, at least on paper, has proven BAS experience? So you're able to kind of shortcut that. And that applies for HVAC, electrical, IT. With electrical knowledge, you look at companies that do electrical installations in BAS. IT, granted, IT is the hardest. It's not as hard as it used to be, but it's still difficult. I won't lie. It is hard. But what you can do is you can look for BAS companies that they rep the IP-enabled controls, or they do systems integration. And then you really just want to highlight your networking or your system administrator skills. Hold on here. I'm going to take a swig of water. Like I said, I'm not editing this, so. It was really humid here in Wisconsin, and now it's really dry. It can't make up its mind. And so it's really messing with me. It's like my throat feels like it's the desert. All right. So this brings us to, all right, you've went and figured out how you're going to transition into building automation systems. And I've given you some really good tips here. I know that the tips I've given you so far are really simple, but just because something's simple does not mean it's not effective. And I really want you to understand that, because I personally am guilty at times of dismissing simple things. It's my wife, and I teach this on my IT webinar, but my wife taught me this question, essentially, where basically you just ask what would need to be true for X. And I've learned to use this question with a lot of IT folks, where I'm like, what would need to be true for you to give me network access? And then they tell you exactly what you need to have network access. Well, it's the same thing here. Think about the simplest path for you to get that building automation career. Maybe it's going to an HVAC company that also has a BAS group. Maybe it's going to an HVAC company that also does Cisco networking, or does IP-enabled controls, and they need someone who understands NAT and DHCP and IP address pools and VLANs and subnets. Well, you can be that person, and then you can go and migrate from there into your HVAC role. So that is an option that a lot of people just kind of dismiss for some reason. I don't know why. But I really encourage you, just because something's simple does not mean you should dismiss it. So where is the future of BAS going? So you're going to do all this work, you're going to get into building automation system, and where are you going to end up? Well, here's the reality. And some of you folks are not going to like this. And you know that I tell you guys these things, I tell you because I care about you. Because I want you to succeed. Any one of you who has dealt with me on a personal level, either through talking on the phone or in emails or just on the blog or Facebook or wherever, you know that I genuinely do care. So I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to like, but it's the truth. The most installers, they're a commodity. Here's the reality. For most building automation companies, it makes a lot more sense for them to outsource the installation to electrical sub. And what do I mean by that? Well, here's the deal. If I go and I have an electrical subcontractor and they need to execute the installation and they mess something up, who does the risk fall on? It falls on them. If they're having trouble meeting a timeline, who's that risk fall on? Ultimately, it falls on them because in contracting, risk rolls downhill. Well, that's the thing, right? So with installation, mounting thermostats, all that stuff, that's so easy. It's so easy to do. And it's something you should just be hiring out. That's just the reality. I'm sorry if that upsets some of y'all who do that for day-to-day living. But I'm just telling you, you may want to broaden your skill set because you're going to find yourself really in a market where there's more skill than there is need. All right. And then here's the other reality. Most controls, they're commodities. I know. I work for a controls company and I'm saying this. But the reality is that, how many ways can you invent electromechanical digital controls? They can only do so much. What it ultimately comes down to is the skill set of the person doing the programming, the skill set of the person doing the designing. This is what separates a good company from a bad company, is the skill set of their people. The reality is that the average controls, they're becoming harder and harder to make margin on, harder and harder to differentiate. And the folks who are finding themselves able to differentiate are the ones who are adding value to the control cell. Maybe they're doing systems integration. Maybe they're doing cloud hosting of BASs. Maybe they're virtualizing things. Maybe they're adding an analytics offering. But that essentially, that old model of just installing controls, calling it a day, that's kind of the expected level now. Hold on, I gotta take another sip here. All right, back. So what's a building automation company to do? I've just painted this gloom and doom picture. What are you to do? Well, there's really three areas, and I kind of mentioned them briefly, but there's really three areas that you can focus on. First is to bundle by selling more technologies. Add lighting to BAS, add access control, add security, add audio visual. Bundle these technologies up. You see several companies that are starting to do that successfully. Next is using IT-enabled technologies, IP controls, virtual servers, cloud computing, those kind of things. And what that allows you to do is that allows you to flatten the architecture. That allows you to use existing IT assets. That allows you to, in some cases, rather than making your control sales, making them a one-time purchase, you make them a renewable purchase. Just like Netflix, you pay for it every month. Imagine paying for your building automation system every month. It's a lot easier for a company to pay that way than to pay all up front. And the final area you can focus on is cloud technologies, analytics, things like that, newer IoT technologies. So you're seeing this kind of trend, right? This trend is that the building automation space is largely moving towards this kind of hybrid IT, BAS, HVAC person. It's just kind of like how a lot of these cars nowadays, they're electronic. You have to have that meter that you plug in there and it reads your fault codes. And a lot of these mechanics are actually having to learn IT skills as so many of these newer cars are computer driven. I mean, they're actually, I think my car, it's essentially a drive-by-wire car. There's no shaft. There's actually electrical signals from the steering wheel that then cause the car to turn. So now you're seeing this new kind of mechanic that has to come along. Well, you're seeing this new kind of BAS professional that has to come along as well, and they have to master this IT knowledge. And so what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to cut it off here. I think I'm right at about the 30-minute mark. And I try to keep these episodes about 30 minutes. I'm going to make this a 2-part episode. And in the next episode, I am going to be talking from a company perspective. How can you build a building automation team? How can you staff a building automation team? What kind of roles do you need to have? How do you evaluate? How do you build that team? How do you operate that team? All those kind of concepts. As I know there's a lot of folks looking at this. And I'll just kind of touch on all the different best practices I myself have developed over years and years in the field. Now, throughout this episode, especially towards the end, I mentioned that there's this real need for IT skills. And what I want to tell you is I've been very successful with the 3 sessions of my Information Technology for Building Automation System Professionals course that I have been putting on for the past couple months now. And the 3rd session's about halfway done now, and I'm starting the 4th session on August 18th at noon. Currently, I have 19 spots left in the course. I only open up my courses now to 20 people at a time. That allows me to be really close with the students and to work with them so that they see success. So if you are a building automation professional and you've seen the need for information technology to help you in your career, to help you in the day-to-day things that you do, then I encourage you to check out my online training program at buildingautomationmonthly.com, IT for the number 4 BASSP. And if that URL is a little difficult for you, then you can simply go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/79, scroll to the bottom of the page, and you will be able to click on the IT for BAS icon, and there you will be able to find out more about the program and enroll in the program. Like I said, right now there's 19 seats open for the August 18th class, and the past 3 sessions have sold out, so I really encourage you to take advantage of that because this is the first time I'm announcing that this session is open. So with that being said, that's the episode, folks. I will see you on next week's podcast episode where we will continue with part 2, where we will look at how do you build a building automation team. All right, folks, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week and continue to push yourself and grow in your career and get better every single day. Take care. Talk to you soon.